Also, not a direct confirmation of the B-2's arrival on Diego Garcia comes from Air Force Global Strike Command, or AFGSC. When asked by TWZ about the Pitch 13 bomber's emergency landing, it responded, "A B-2 Spirit bomber arrived at Hickam Air Force Base. U.S. Strategic Command, its components, and subordinate units routinely conduct global operations in coordination with other combatant command services and participating U.S. government agencies to deter, detect, and if necessary, defeat strategic attacks against the United States and its allies. To preserve operational security, we do not discuss details about exercises or operations." That may be the case. However, there are clues in this seemingly boilerplate statement that may give the game away. AFGSC didn't need to mention its coordination with other countries, for instance. We know that Diego Garcia is operated by the UK and that 3 B-2s stopped off in Australia to refuel. Perhaps there's a hint of AFGSC trying to get ahead of any follow-up questions in the statement. Add to all of this, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth's extension of the USS Harry S. Truman stay in the Red Sea, which we now know is linked to the airstrikes the US is conducting in Yemen. That aircraft carrier is set to be joined by the USS Carl Vinson, another aircraft carrier, along with a small fleet of destroyers in the coming days. It all amounts to the US building the strongest combined aerial and naval force near Iran that it's employed for quite some time. Which begs the question, what does all of this mean for Iran? In the immediate sense, Iran will be very concerned about the arrival of B-2s on Diego Garcia, because the aircraft are among the most advanced that the US has in its arsenal. Northrop Grumman, which builds the B-2, provides some basic details about the bomber's specifications. It's piloted by 2 people and can reach high subsonic speeds. No specifics are provided, though this description likely means the B-2's top speed falls within the Mach 0.8 to Mach 1 range, slightly lower than the speed of sound, but still fast enough to outpace most aircraft outside of fighter jets. The bomber has a 50,000-foot combat ceiling and can fly for up to 6,000 nautical miles without needing to refuel. Diego Garcia is over 3,000 miles away from Iran's southern edge, meaning that range is just barely enough for the B-2 to make it to the country and back to the island. However, the B-2's range climbs to 10,000 nautical miles with a single aerial refueling, reinforcing the reasons why we're also seeing aerial tankers arrive at Diego Garcia. As for weapons, the B-2 can carry either conventional bombs or nuclear warheads. It's also an expensive aircraft. In terms of conventional weapons, the bomber can carry up to 80 500-pound Mk-62C mines for naval purposes, or the same amount of Mk-82 ground bombs. Alternatively, it can be loaded with JDAMs for ground assaults, up to 16 Mk-82 2,000-pound bombs, or a host of other munitions. If the US were to go down the nuclear route in a war with Iran, it could load the bombers with 16 of its B-61-7, B-61-12 or B-83 nukes, or up to 8 of its B-61-11 nuclear bombs. The latter is a ground-penetrating and bunker-busting nuke with a yield of 400 kilotons, more than enough to devastate most Iranian cities. The US Air Force website also says that the B-2 has a $1.157 billion unit cost, meaning the US has just transferred over $5 billion of hardware to Diego Garcia, even before accounting for cargo transports, tankers, and other supporting equipment. Frankly, the B-2 is among the most terrifying aircraft the US has, and if Iran sees it flying over its skies, it could be a signal that explosive devastation is incoming. Which brings us to another question. How does the US plan to use its amassed B-2s? We don't have any direct answers from the US military, which has already said that it won't provide any details about specific operations. We can also practically rule out the possibility of the US nuking Iran with its B-2s, as that would only happen if Iran launched a nuclear weapon at the US, which is extremely unlikely. Instead, it seems likely that the US is mostly attempting to project power against Iran with this B-2 deployment. TWZ notes that the last time the US sent a large contingent of B-2 bombers anywhere was in 2022. It sent 4 of the aircraft to the RAAF base Amberley to support the deployment of the Pacific Air Force's Bomber Task Force in a move that was seen as an American attempt to put the squeeze on China. The deployment was essentially a warning to Beijing, with the US communicating that it still had plenty of influence in the Indo-Pacific region. This also isn't the first time that the US has sent a large contingent of its bombers to Diego Garcia. It also did it in 2020, following the US military's successful operation to kill Qasem Soleimani, the former head of the Iran Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps Quds Force. That time, the US sent 6 B-52s, likely as a way to tell Iran that it would be very unwise to seek any sort of revenge for the operation. Going even further back, the US also used Diego Garcia, along with several other bases in the Indian Ocean, to launch bombing strikes during the initial phases of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. That's where the power projection comes into play. The US knows that it's been able to use B-2s on Diego Garcia to calm Iran's collective temper before. It also has a history of using the island to launch successful bombing campaigns against countries very close to Iran, particularly its neighbour Iraq. Worst yet for Iran, the US has used its B-2s against the Houthis in the past. Most recently, October 2024 saw America conduct strikes using its bunker buster bombs to take out key Houthi bases. Again, the signal was sent to Iran. This is what we can do to your proxies, so imagine what we could do to you. The fact that the B-2 is also the only US aircraft certified to carry and deploy the 30,000-pound GBU-57B massive ordnance penetrator bomb, which can decimate deeply buried targets, also shows us that the US is preparing for a fight where Iran's most important officials may try to hide underground. And then there's the range issue. We already know that the US can use its aerial tankers to keep its B-2s in the air long enough for them to reach Iran and get back to Diego Garcia. The same can't be said for any Iranian aircraft or weapons. Iran's primary bomber is the Russian-made and Soviet-era Su-24, which has a maximum range of just 1,864 miles. That's not even enough to get it from Iran's southern top to Diego Garcia, never mind making a return journey. Iran's missiles also can't travel far enough to reach Diego Garcia, according to TWZ. It points to research by the Council on Foreign Relations, which notes that Iran's longest-range missile can only travel about 1,240 miles, around half of the distance between Iran and Diego Garcia. All considered, US will be able to attack Iran with its B-2 bombers as and when it feels like it, while Iran will be forced to rely on its limited aerial defenses, which mostly consist of Russian-made S-300s that aren't a match for the B-2. It certainly can't counterattack, as Iran just doesn't have the range in any of its weapons. So what exactly does the US hope to achieve by sending up to a quarter of its B-2s to Diego Garcia? Halting Iranian support of the Houthis is a priority, as Trump has said. The Foundation for Defenses of Democracies says Iran regularly smuggles missiles, drones and bombs into Yemen for the Houthis to use in their Red Sea attacks. In June 2024, the outlet reported that the UK had documented the entry of around 500 ships from Iran into Houthi-controlled ports in Yemen, suggesting that the flow of weapons is large and constant. Trump wants to put a stop to that. But perhaps more importantly, there's a nuclear element to the B-2 deployment on Diego Garcia. On March 7, The Guardian reported on Trump's claims that he'd gotten in touch with Iran to open a dialogue on a new nuclear weapons deal, which will ultimately result in the country accepting that it's not allowed to develop nukes.
I've written him a letter saying, I hope you're going to negotiate, because if we have to go in militarily, it's going to be a terrible thing for them.
The letter reportedly includes a 2-month deadline for Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei to come to the table, which means Trump wants talks to start by the beginning of May. So, the arrival of B-2s is all about applying pressure. The US is telling Iran that it knows Iran doesn't have nukes yet, but the US does, and it can drop them from B-2s that it's keeping